Ready? Ready?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting, December 13th, 2023, 4 p.m. This meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk.
City Attorney Doctor. Here. City Manager Burton.
Here.
Commissioner Dean. Here. Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Reed. Here. Commissioner Shirtliff.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. Finish. Okay. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public comments during the meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Commissioners, questions, comments? Recommendations from Helena Citizens Council, Representative Nancy Perry, you have the floor. Did it again, huh? Oops.
Mr. Commissioner, or Mr. Mayor, I mean.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Nancy Perry from District 2. Our last HCC meeting was on November 15th, and we have no meeting in December. But in our January meeting is going to be the first time that all the HCC members who were elected in the November city election are going to meet. And we're meeting on Wednesday, January 24th. We're meeting in person only in the commission chambers. Normally, most of us meet by Zoom. We're going to be voting on officers to serve on the executive committee, and a nominating committee is currently finding nominations to fill each of those positions. We have that was number one. Number two, we frequently have speakers from other local organizations who invite us in some way to work with them. And we have a policy document that discusses those interactions. And we wanted to define exactly what kind of interaction is appropriate. So we added the following line of text to the above document. And this is what we added. In order for the HCC body or a neighborhood district or an individual HCC representative acting in an official capacity to participate in an event or volunteer opportunity with a local organization, the organization must meet the following criteria. It has to be a governmental entity. It must have nonprofit status. It must be nonpartisan, secular, and be adding value to or otherwise benefiting the Helena community. So that was, we're pretty much writing that for ourselves so we could help us decide when we're going to cooperate with some other organization and when we will tell them that we cannot. Okay, number three, the fiscal year 2025 budget. We're mindful that the city is looking ahead for writing that budget, and we're responsible for writing a budget report. We have always just kind of ad hoc asked individuals to contribute to our report, but now we're just making that process more official. So members are going to be volunteering or being assigned to write sections of the budget report about specific city departments. So you get to pick your city department, and if some city department doesn't get picked, then somebody will be assigned to study on that city department. We're going to invite the city manager and the various department heads to speak to us at HCC meetings, coordinating those calls so that the department heads are not inundated once we start studying up on their department. We don't want to take up too much of your time. And finally, number four, the strategic planning meetings. We want to thank you for inviting us to attend the strategic planning sessions this coming Thursday and Friday. Several people have indicated an interest in attending them by Zoom. HCC will be sending 4 representatives. And that's all I have, sir.
Thank you, Representative Perry. Questions, comments for Representative Perry? Thank you. City Manager's report.
Here, I have nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Presentations. Extending the duration recreation of the landfill monitoring district. Director Leland and or Deputy Director Coleman, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Commission. This is just to give you an update. We just closed the protest period at the end of November for creating the landfill monitoring district that was required by state law to be recreated every 13 years. Going through it, this was a great process. We received 623 responses to the letters that were sent out. And you were only, if you were going to protest, is when you required it to be sent in. You didn't have to send it in if you were in favor of it. But we did receive 325 in favor of it. So they took the time, sent it back, said they're in favor of it. And we received 298 in protest. So we had more favor than protest. And with the weighted protest, because commercial pays more than residential and you have to use the assessment amount, so commercial got a little more weight on it. We came up with only 2.85% protest. That's way under the 10% protest that requires us to go out to referendum. So this process just means that we had an informed public, informed constituents, and that is purely because of Jake Garson, Leah Anderson, Ed Coleman, Amy, Paul. They did all the work. Sheila's group also did a ton, and with Sheila to bring everything forward. So it is the staff that should be commended on the response we got and how it came out. So we'll be bringing this forward on Monday, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Comments or questions for Director Leland? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, I did appreciate the level of outreach and engagement in the different ways in which the public was engaged on this. So it was, I've now seen 2 recreation extension, whatever the phrasing is. And I thought this was a really good example. So thank you for all the work that went into it. The video was particularly charming. Thank you.
I think he needs to thank the people that did the work. Any other comments for? Okay, moving along. Do you have any public comments for Director Leland? Madam Clerk, do you have any online?
Mr. Mayor, I have no public comment on my.
Okay. Public safety service level presentation. Well, we'll start with Fire Chief Campbell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. If we can hold off for a second to get our presentation up, please.
Oh, sure.
We have a computer restarting unexpectedly.
Oh,
Well, I guess I do have a few introductory remarks, if it's okay, Mayor. I know that you've been engaged on both fire service and the police department, the level of service analysis and discussion. This is an overview of that work so that we can report back to the City Commission and receive further direction. I don't expect any decisions to be made this evening. And it's a service level discussion where we're looking out 10 and 20 years as to how we provide emergency public safety services for the city of Helena and the residents that live here. So with that, I think the whole team's done a real good job. There discussion at the end of the presentation.
Good.
So the city manager said, this is a pretty in-depth, broad discussion. So there's a lot of information we wanted to provide you to start this initial conversation and see where it goes. Chief Campbell and Chief Petty are both going to give a kind of a brief summary and recap of the fire department master plan and the police department staffing study, which you've had previous presentations on individually, but this will be the first time I think they've been presented, together, and the conversation is kind of coming full circle. So go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, we've gone through a master plan process on 2022 in concert with a third-party consulting group. We went through master plan process, which looked at current conditions, future system demand projections, community risk assessment, future system delivery models, and some recommendations and strategies. As you may recall, it's a fairly robust document. And I believe you all have copies of that. And if you ever need another one or misplaced one, just let me know and we can furnish you with a replacement. In the spring of 2023, the Planning Committee provided the Commission an executive summary of that master plan. So a little easier to digest in size. And hopefully that information is still readily available to you. And again, if you need a copy, please let me know. Next slide, please. So as a quick recap of all of that information, thank you. Over the last 6 years, annual call volume increases by about 4.2% per year. In 1979, the last year when we opened a new fire station, the annual call volume was 504 calls. We're projected to be over 5,000 for 2023. There is no station on the north side of the railroad tracks. We don't have a sufficient apparatus space for all of the vehicles that belong to the fire department. And our training facility and location is suboptimal for providing service from that location. The need for a new station and additional personnel were included in 2006 as well as 2022 master plan. And that's where we stand right now. Snag, the button doesn't work. And that's the summary from the fire department. I believe Chief Petty has some additional information from his ongoing project.
Shetty, you have the floor. Mayor, Commission, thank you. I'll try to make mine as brief as that's nearly impossible. So I talk too much. The timeline, how did we end up with a staffing study? So we looked at the last 20 years. We basically have had the same amount of officers working for the Helena Police Department with a little fluctuation of maybe 3 to 4 officers. We've been around that 53, 54, 55 sworn members, police officers. So we're in need of a staffing study, and I have a few graphs to show basically the calls are trending up. Calls for services are trending up, the written reports are trending up, and our proactivity in the community, meaning our community presence, is actually going down because of the amount of calls we have to react to. So with that said, here's the timeline. 2019, we sent officers out to Washington. Edico Solutions put on a presentation for 3 of our officers about staffing, where we should be, how to compute staffing. They came back to the department. What we tried to do when they came back to the department is within our CAD system, which will be changing out this year. We tried to input, have officers say when they're busy and mark, because we can measure calls for service because that's entered into dispatch, but you really can't tell how long an officer is working on that call for service, because once they close out that call, they're working on a report and they could be following up the next day. So you don't have a good number showing the total amount of time working on that. When those officers came back from that staffing study, that's what we tried to interject into there. It kind of worked, kind of didn't. The staffing study tried to capture the numbers within the CAD RMS system, and that's when we brought Meyer through Edico Solutions. He came out in 2022. He spent about a year, a little under a year, in the staffing study that he brought forth in July when he presented here and allowed us with all the numbers that came through. It took him a year to compute all that data. So what I want to do with that, because what he did is he just looked at patrol, he didn't look at the entire police department. So after that, what I did is formed a staffing study committee to the police department can tell you all day, well, we need this many officers. But what I want to see is an outside view of presenting our information and having others say, either I agree with that, or I don't think you need as many, or you're too short, you need more. So Commissioner Logan was part of that staffing study committee along with 3 other citizens and a few members of my police department. And we basically broke down the staffing study. We broke down other divisions in the police department and talked that out. We had 3 3-hour meetings of me rambling about the police department. So I think they went good. I'll wait for Commissioner Logan's and see how it went. I get the next slide, please. So to what Friesmeyer with Edico Solutions, the staffing study, he basically came up with reactive time and proactive time. So minutes of reactive time, minutes of proactive time. What he would like, what the staffing study said, model throughout the United States of a 30-30 split for each hour that an officer works. So you have 30 minutes of reactive time, meaning you're going to a call for service. A call is dispatched to you go and deal with the call, and then 30 minutes of proactive time, traffic enforcement, school walkthroughs, community policing, just police presence somewhere other than reacting to a call coming in. Currently, what he found is we're at a 39-minute reactive, 21-minute proactive split. We're trying to get to that 30-30 split. Again, high level overview. We had already talked about this. I'm just hitting some of the highlights here.
Chief, before you go,
Yes, sir.
I don't want to forget. That's why.
Yep.
Is that possible?
To hit 30-30?
Yeah.
With a few more bodies, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And that's what he shows us. And I'll get to the end there and he'll show that if you put this many call takers or patrolmen on at a certain time and you have the supervisors that aren't call takers, you can actually hit that 30-30 split.
Okay.
Next slide.
I've been working on it.
Oh, Chief.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
This graph was provided by Edico Solutions. This was in the staffing study report. The first 6 years, 17 through 23, shows the reactive hours spent by our patrol officers. Calls that came in, the amount of hours they spent. Now, I will say this again, it's only looking at patrol, and with this, it's not counting for the follow-up time because we didn't do a good job recording follow-up time or follow-up investigations. But it kind of gives us a trend in what we're looking at. And then if you look at his forecasted, and he's just using the numbers he pulled, the forecasted numbers, it trends upwards for reactive hours up to 28. And again, this forecast is only for 5 years. I said what we had the same number of officers the last 20 years, ranging in between low 50s to mid 50s. 2003 calls for service that year, we had 26,739. 2022, we had 28,012 calls. Not a significant jump, but that's at reactive policing. And I've got 2 graphs that will actually hit on it. Go back one for me, John. Just one. There you go. To date, December 11th, we actually are sitting at 28,432 calls for service. Again, a call for service is someone calls in, needs a police presence or a phone call or some kind of police response. So we're up 420 from 2022. We still have 20 days left of 2023, and we're averaging 73 calls a day the first 10 days of December. Next slide, please. It helps me get adjusted here. Thanks, Sean. So The calls for service is fine because that's the numbers that entered in dispatch that tells us how many calls we went to. But the amount of written reports that go along with that, we have to show that we are spending time on that, because a simple theft could take 15 to 30 minutes to input into the computer, into our reporting system. But you get a domestic situation, a DUI or something, the officer could spend 2 hours. Then that bleeds into your proactive time, where now we're decreasing that, and we're still stuck on the reactive time because of reports. So that's pretty small writing for everyone. But in 2022, we had 6,080 reports, and then supplemental reports. I put that under the DR. That's our written reports. That supplemental reports are extra reports. So if you do a follow-up to a theft, or if you have suspect information, or you have to get a warrant for a person, you'll do a supplemental report. You're always doing reports. So there's an extra 3,128 supplemental reports. As of the date of December 11th, we're sitting at 6,230. I threw the trend line in there to just show that it's trending up. Obviously, it's not huge. You did see a spike in 18, 19, and then we hit our COVID years, but we are trending up. So, with that said, the CFS is coming in, the calls for service, we're sitting at 28,000. Our written reports are sitting a little over 6,000. Well, if those are trending up, then what you have is our self-initiated activity, our proactiveness, us being out in the community more, and our community presence is going down. You could show that from 2003 to where we accounted for 10,069, whether it was traffic stops, whether it was school walkthroughs, whether it's any of the stuff that counts as proactive. And now we're down to 5,677 in 2023. Next slide. Thanks. Current day, what we're sitting at is 22 patrol call takers. That's folks that are actually trained to take calls independently, do not have a training officer. We have 4 currently in the field training program. Those folks have an officer with them. They are taking calls, but basically it's 2 of them while one's getting trained. We have 2 folks serving our country. They're probably not going to be back till about October of next year. And then we have 4 sergeants assigned to patrol. They're not call takers. Of course, they will jump in and take calls if necessary. So that's current day. One move we made last year to where we got rid of one of our lieutenants in our command staff, and we made a desk sergeant for not only the court position, our records division, and as well as taking lockups, trying to take some of the burden off patrol. So he's out there in the front lobby, and with some of the walk-ups that come into the lobby, he can take some of those calls for service. In conclusion for this PowerPoint, the number highlighted there, the 5-year model, and this is what EDICO shows. In order to get that 30-30 split, would be 32 officers as call takers to hit that. And we're sitting at, right now we're sitting at 28 call takers, and he's showing 32 in 2028. Again, only looking at patrol. And this is what we got out of the staffing study. And again, with the committee, we discussed further our detective division, our SROs, and other people that make that decision. So that was a lot in a little bit of time. So that's my portion of it for today.
Thank you, Chief. Comments or questions from the
Mr. Mayor, when you all had your committee meetings,
yeah,
did you guys start discussing like what a potential dollar amount could look like for, and would it be those 4 officers, or would you be looking for maybe potentially more?
So we're looking at more, because again, that was just patrol. I believe we came up with a consensus of upwards to 9 to 10 FTE. Now that could be a mixture of non-sworn and sworn officers to make sure that we're, one of those is a non-sworn crash investigator, and I don't want to get too way off on it, but that's because we can show that the amount of crashes in Helena is a lot.
Yeah.
But the dollar amount we have not looked at, and that's where have Sheila help us out with that.
Okay.
Thank you. A quick follow-up question for you, Chief, was if you show the 2028 number, but it looks like it goes from 30 up to 32
Yep.
between now and 2028.
Yep.
Did the committee discuss like a phased plan for reaching the 28, or is it?
No, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off,
You're good.
Mayor, Commissioner Reed. It did not show the phase plan. What it did show, those were based on the CAD numbers that Tim Friesmeyer from Medico provided us. So he just said, by the numbers and by the reactive hours and you trending upwards, this is what you need to handle those calls.
Okay. And then if I might, Mr. Mayor, a quick question for Chief Campbell. You mentioned the there's no station north of the tracks, and I am wondering if you happen to know, even if it's just a rough number, what percentage of calls for service come from north of the tracks?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Reed, I don't have that data in front of me now, but I can get it for you.
Okay, I would appreciate that. I think it's fairly clear that if we have two stations out of the tracks, there's need, but I think the more information we have about the percentage of calls coming and any information about how you handle those calls, is it if they're on the west side of a certain line, they come from the west side station, east side, just how do you currently handle that need now? Thank you. Appreciate that.
Chief Petty, Chief Gamble. This question is for Chief Petty. With the workforce challenges that we're facing, how do you anticipate recruitment, or how do you anticipate overcoming those workforce challenges when you're trying to recruit new officers?
So we do have recruitment issues. Currently, we're only 3 down, and I do say only because at the beginning of last year we were 8 down. So we are sitting a lot better. I think with current negotiations through the association contract, and I've looked at a lot of numbers across the state wage-wise, we're actually right in the mix of wage. One of our, as far as like recruitment methods going in that, a real life example would be, we had a gentleman that was working in Arizona as an officer, so he'd be a lateral officer. He's had 5 years of experience. He put in for Kalispell and Helena. That's where he's going to work. He said that to us, and it's basically who's going to recruit and do that. And we actually were able to recruit him. And I think it was because of we didn't go away from our backgrounds or anything like that. We did the same backgrounds. What we did is basically go as fast as we can, and as also as comprehensive as we can within that time. But we set a background. He did his interview with me on a Tuesday. We had a background investigator in Arizona 6 days later doing a background on him. And I think that just showed our interest in him. It did help. Helena housing was cheaper than the Kalispell area. He did add that as well. But the big 7 in the state of Montana were competing over the same officers.
Yeah.
So all of us we get calls saying, did this person apply with you? Did this person apply? And we're competing over those top qualified candidates.
Yes, please, Chief.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioner Reed, roughly 25% of the total incidents occurred north of the railroad tracks. And those calls are divided between Station 1 and Station 2, with Montana Avenue being the geographic split.
That was fast.
Thank my partner.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, please, Commissioner.
Thank you both for your presentations. Obviously, we've got a lot to think about in the very short term, I would say. One thing I didn't ask, and I guess I might, before I ask the question, might comment that the staffing study provided by the our steering committee learned as much from the questions of the 3 citizens as asked some really, really good questions, and similar to the concerns that we might have in terms of what all things forward. But so thanks for that opportunity. I think any questions that we do have about both police and fire The question that I have for you tonight is, as Chief Campbell showed the kind of executive summary, I think you might call it, that came out of the their committee that reviewed their staffing study. Is it possible to kind of give a similar summary that I think both would be helpful as we start considering how to move forward?
Yeah, so I think that's a great idea, put together. So this one is that high level overlook as we possibly go down the road of looking at levy, something like that. But what you're saying is, I can get that together, what we talked about in the 3 meetings.
One of the things that might be helpful is, the Medico's focus, as you pointed out, has been very control over it. And I think one of the differences between looking at it and we did in our meetings was looking at on the other side with the detective.
Yep.
And there was some pretty eye-opening things that I think most people don't really realize in terms of things like internet crimes against children and all of those sort of social struggles that HPD is dealing with, in addition to just regular detective work and investigations and all that. But so I think that summary might it might be helpful if it kind of delves into that side of things as well. Because that's it's going to be an important ask I think on your part, and something pretty important for us to consider.
Mayor, if I might, please, more, and I think within that summary, because I think some of the eye openers for the group were the charts provided, the internet crimes against children cases, that if I did the 20 years that showed it was down here, either it's underreported, not reported, but now it has skyrocketed in the amount of cases. I think putting all that together and putting those graphs in there showing the call load with just that portion of it, I think you're exactly right. It'll provide a good picture on the other side of the control.
Thank you. Thanks.
I know, well, are actually, we're not looking for direction necessarily today, but I think priming the pump as to what's to come. Do we have a timeline of when we might be able to start considering numbers and maybe strategy if we are going to go out for a levy or a bond? And I'm sure, I don't know if we're going to get to this, but in our packet, some of the later slides talks about, the timelines. I know I've said this in previous meetings. I feel pretty strongly that we have a higher likelihood, I think, of being successful in the June election than in the November election, just given what a general presidential election with the Senate election also on the ballot. I think if we want people actually paying attention to what we're asking for, we don't want to be fighting for their attention with a whole bunch of other things that will be on the ballot. And I also think that our community growth is not going to slow down anytime soon. The calls for service for both HPD and the fire department are not going to slow down, and we're in a position where I think we need to start making some decisions pretty quickly. I think we have the benefit of being in a community that understands the value of public service and what it means to be able to, pick up the phone on what could be one of your worst days and have someone there to help you immediately. So I think, I'm really anxious to hear when we can start talking about numbers and strategy about how we move forward and what time frame.
Mayor, Commissioner, I'll just say that we're pretty new at the staff level, and we're looking for direction today. And if you want further analysis at our next meeting, we'll be able to do that. And I think, are we going to overview the rest of the presentations?
Yeah, if that's okay, Mayor, we
So
do.
that just lays out the tools, and if the commission is saying, what would it look like if we proceeded in June? How would the numbers break out between the departments? And I think what we would do is bring options for your consideration for the correction. Probably a meeting right after the first of the year, I think.
Mayor, I might quickly add the last levy attempt, which was the successful 2018 fire safety levy. If I recall, Dave might be able to help with this, but I think it was brought before the commission, say February, I think in March, to pass a resolution authorizing the vote. There was a let's say 4 or 5 months, whatever it happened to be at the time, public education, and then in June, a June election. So I guess I just say that to give you a understanding that there is time, it seems like it's possible.
So,
Fast.
with that segue, it kind of brings us to the next point, and that status quo budget does not fund the changes that have been brought forward through the fire department master plan and the police department's staffing study. And so we did want to walk through and highlight possible solutions, and then we will get into what some of those hypothetical timelines look like, and a recap of some of the recent election results in Montana related to this.
Thank you, Mayor. And so, next slide, please. So, as Jake said, that our current tax levies would not at this point support an increase in service level without maybe perhaps impacting other city services, shifting from one service to another to increase the service levels in public safety. Some of the options for adding tax dollars obviously is a mill levy for a public service safety mill levy. And just so to put it in context, in the most recent tax levy, 1 mill generates about $98,000 for the city. So $98,000 for the city. So it's approximately $98,000 that our current taxable values generate for the city for 1 mill. So you can keep that in mind and considering the context of moving forward and options for funding, different service levels that will present to the city. That's kind of a baseline of what we could generate out of 1 mill. Next slide. One of the things that I did want to point out is a general obligation bond would be an option. You can do 2 different types of levies. One is an operational bond. One is a general obligation bond for capital. You could combine them. Typically, general obligation bonds are about 20 years for capital purposes, and they expire after 20 years. They're a low interest bond. Right now, the city has 1 general obligation bond that was a voted bond. In 2017, we refunded that bond. The payment on that annually is about $585,000 a year. We raise, just last year it went down to 5 mils, but historically before that it was about 7 mils that we had to add to the tax payers' tax bills in order to make that annual payment. And then we have 4 more annual payments on that before that bond is fully fully paid off and goes away. So thinking about that for a future bond, we would still have that existing bond that we have to, we're obligated to add mills to the taxpayer payments, so that they can pay that, we can pay that bond off. Next slide, please. And so I just also just wanted to let you know before we move into the history of this that each of these types of a general obligation bond and or the mill levy, obviously you have to go out to the voters to pass. There are other financing options, but for something of this magnitude, you would want to go out to the voters and raise funds through mill levies in order to pay for those types of bonds.
We did want to touch on the more recent history with public safety related levies. Commissioner Logan mentioned previously 2018. There was a successful ballot initiative going back to 2008. There was also an ask for approximately 25 mills. That levy failed. That was both fire personnel, patrol officers, and some capital needs related to staffing. We talked briefly and just run through kind of a high level overview of election process, because that's certainly I think needs to be part of the conversation is timing. The process starts with the commission passing a resolution indicating its intent to create a new mill levy and issue bonds through an election. The resolution must be approved at least 85 days prior to the election. Ballot is created based on statutory requirements. Notice must be given of the election. Notice must be provided at least 3 times, no earlier than 40 days and no later than 10 days prior to the election. And then we will add a little bit of context to this at the end of the presentation. But generally the election must be on the same day as the June primary or the November general election. And the next slide is just more of a visual, again, really hypotheticals looking at next year because of the next elections that we would be coming up to. So these would be hypothetical timelines based on the 2 election dates in 2024. The one thing, as a group that we have discussed many times, this is a conversation that's happening throughout the state. And we saw that in the November 2023 election. Several communities went out with similar asks. Great Falls, I think, had the most substantial ask of the ballot initiatives that were on around the state, with fire personnel, police personnel, court personnel, dispatchers, and then equipment and training to support that. In total, they were proposing to levy up to 103 mills for approximately $10.7 million in new revenue. And that vote failed by 61% opposed. Gallatin County Central Valley Fire District also went out for a mill levy for firefighters and paramedics. They proposed up to 30 mills annually. They're currently at 10, and theirs failed with a 66% opposed vote. Missoula actually started the process. I believe their commission approved the resolution, and then they decided prior to the election to remove it from the ballot in September. Theirs was for proposed 34 mills for an additional $7 million approximately in new revenue. And then we did note that in Laurel, they passed a mill levy for additional EMS providers. It was 50 mills for approximately $450,000 in new revenue, and that actually passed by 62% in favor vote. And then the last slide that we have, did want to note in the time that we had started working on this presentation, Kalispell is moving forward with a public safety mill levy in March, and Attorney Doctor is gonna speak to the special election, I think briefly. But their ask is proposing 60.9 mills, which would generate approximately 4.5 million in new revenue.
Thanks, Jake, Mayor, Commissioners. Kalispell did opt to do a special election. That is an option in Helena as well. The resolution that starts off the process, you can indicate a certain date for a special election, but it has to be passed through resolution, and then all the same process applies. So you can see that March 24th, in that process timeline, there's 85 days prior to the election, you have to do a resolution. We're already past that time frame and close to the time frame where we'd be hitting for doing a resolution for the June primary. So timing wise, June might be the soonest we could do it. But there is the option if we don't hit June and we don't want to do the general election in November, to hit something the next year in a special election. So just wanted to raise that with you as an option.
That's all we have as far as the presentation for today. If there are any further questions, as the city manager indicated, further information that we can gather and provide, we'll leave it to you for questions and discussions as you see fit.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question, which it is not a simple question, but I'm hoping for a very simple overview type answer. The mills versus the bonds. It appears to be there's an either or. You can do mills versus bonds, but all the language says that you assess mills or pay the bond. So for the purpose of the public, could we just very big picture explain the difference between the two and what the impact is to the public and how it comes across to them?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioner Reed. So, yes, you do raise mills in order to pay for voting bonds. There are other types of non-voted bonds that the city could consider, other types of financing, but then you have to consider where are you going to get the resources to pay for that. So typically, in order to go out for a bond of this size and or an operational ask of this size, you would go out to the voters and then ask them to raise mills in order to pay for operations and also to pay the debt on the bond. Whenever you do go out for a general obligation bond, the commission is obligated by law in order to tax the public to pay for the bonds. So that is an obligation of the commission to do that.
And Mayor, Commissioners, I think the practice more often than not when going out for a bond, it's usually a facility like wastewater treatment plants, those type of physical improvements. Ongoing operating expenses like wages are typically increasing.
Well, you done?
No, thank you. That was helpful.
Ms. Rand, so I think what would be helpful moving forward is maybe if we could start kind of putting together scenarios of this is, say 3 to 5 potential options of what it could look like, whether it's, and we kind of talked about this in the fire department committee, but for a bond for a facility, a new fire station, this is the amount we would be looking at. When we start talking about a staffing operational mill levy, like this is what it could look like all at once, but also I think that it might be worth us considering kind of a phasing in additional mills, especially considering that we have 4 years left from the GEO obligation. So I don't know how time intensive that is going to be, but I think one of the things for us to consider I mean, I know, Great Falls, I think is the closest, so we think, you know, we've for a long time had some similarities with Great Falls. I would say probably less so in the last decade. But it was a pretty aggressive ask, but they also had decades of let's say, less investment. So I think a lot more catching up to do, hopefully, than we really have. But I think if we can maybe start laying out potential numbers and figuring out where is their support, not just on the commission, but we think in the community for a reasonable ask to start providing additional services and meeting these increasing demands, would be a helpful next step.
Yeah, we'll put together scenarios for the commission to review. And I think realistically it would be after the first of the year, but early on in January. Provide that information and get further direction. But I think that we'll be able to meet that time frame. That's
Go ahead, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. I think this is a comment or a question, but we have to consider with the schools looking at getting on the ballot, the Helena athletic facilities looking at getting on the ballot, property taxes is, what is the best time to do this? Is it going to be June of 24, November of 24, 25? What would be the pros and cons of either one of those? But I do like the idea of having some options to look at, and language that we can work with, and also to the taxpayers can disseminate and make a really good informed decision. But I guess what city manager, what are the pros and cons of either 24 or 25? I guess that remains to be seen, but what's your take on that?
They can put that into research. I mean,
we could talk further about that in January. I mean, I think that just from a staff perspective, there's a cost and there's a mechanism, which for us to increase the service level within public safety would require a vote and a bond or increase in the law. The pros and cons, and there are a lot of discussions taking place in the community, but those aren't city only discussions. So I haven't had the opportunity to analyze all of that. But I'm sure that based upon conversations that you've had and other information that we might be able to bring forward, that can be a part of the future discussion. But I do think that we'll have scenarios from the fire department, the police department, lay that on the table relative to timeframes. And with that additional information, we're kind of waiting for this meeting to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. So that it's at the direction of the commission. Then we can continue to have that level of discussion relative to the strategic approach that you may or may not want to take. So,
thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the struggles that I have, and believe me, it pains me, given my background in fire service, is it sounds like we're combining. And as we've seen here tonight, it's been 20 some years since anything's really substantively happened to the police department staffing wise. And in 2018, a levy happened that increased staffing for the fire department. Well, it's not necessarily for the industry standard, but if we throw all in, I guess that's where the crystal ball comes in. I mean, Commissioner Shirtliff's asking about is, do we do a combined? Do we do a police levy? In my mind, if I were to pick sides, and this is where it pains me. Given the fact that police has had, as was said here tonight, really anything substantively done towards its staffing. Do we want to consider an approach where we take one public safety agency in a year and then maybe a year or so later consider the other? Something.
I think the community will be very wary of that. We should just go, in my opinion, I think we should go.
Well, and I'm totally
You know,
comfortable
combination.
with that, particularly given the vote of the electorate.
Mhm.
But it's just the
I understand. I hear you.
chances of success.
Any other comments from the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'm very much supportive of getting information soon so that if we want to consider the June
Right.
option, we can. And I appreciate that's a lot of work done quickly. So thank you in advance for making it possible for us to have that discussion. Thanks.
Do we have any public comments on this?
Ms. Mayor, I have no public comment on.
So, did you in a roundabout way get your? Department report, discussion of draft resolution to conduct a local government review. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, thank you. This is just a preliminary draft of a resolution that's included in your packet for the calling of the question for the local government review, which is, as you well know, we've talked about it before, a constitutional mandate. We're required to conduct this review, and since Jake does an amazing job with his work, I'm going to steal his thunder. Use his timeline he provided to you. So as you see in the packet, the resolution that is included has some highlighted blank spots, and those are the questions that I would ask you consider tonight and offer direction. The packet is asking you to not necessarily make a decision this evening, at least provide myself and the city manager with additional information you may require. But the two questions that need to be considered are the number of study commissioners you would like as a body, governing body, and how you would like to fund the local government review. So there's the, apologize.
Are you done?
I see Mr. Manager has hand raised.
But you finish what you're doing, then we question.
I was letting the manager jump in. Yeah, so as I was saying, there's really those two questions we need answered. And again, I've worked with the city manager's office in any capacity that you see fit to get that resolution put through. The elections office has asked that we get the resolution finalized prior to February so that they have time. As you can see on the timeline in front of you, that's to allow for them to get the ballot drafted in time for the June election.
Mayor, commissioners, if it's your pleasure, we could come back right after the first of the year with recommendations in terms of typical numbers on the study commission and how, what kind of a budget have we used in the past or others have used in the past for your consideration so that you have something to go by.
I think so.
That was my question. So thank you. If we could get that in the future, that'd be great.
For the future. Any other comments from the commission? Perfect.
I would just put this out here. I know we'll get to it, but I think from once I've looked at and just looking at other structures, I think my ideal number of study commissioners would be 5. I think any more you're going to have a mess, and too few and you might have, you know, an echo chamber. So that's where I am for that piece.
Is it study commission now?
Yeah, well, I agree with the 5 as well. I think, yeah. That's really
5 is what I land on, but I'd be interested to hear what.
You're killing me. Okay, we hear you. Any other comments? Do we have any public comments?
I do not, if I may, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager, I apologize, I did not pull up the last few resolutions that called for the question, but traditionally, City of Helena over the past 4 local government reviews has had 5 study commissioners listed in that resolution. So I can provide that information.
All right. Okay. Your hands up? Oh. ADA inventory update. Well, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. We have our consultant Cidian online. They're going to walk you through what the ADA inventory general overview. They're still crunching the data that they collected for us, which that data will be presented at the Sidewalk Summit in January. So she's gonna walk you through what Cidian does, kind of a general review, what it did and what it will look like. She'll be using other cities as examples, but with your permission, I'd turn it over to Kara to give you your presentation.
Kara?
Thank you so much, everyone. It's great to meet you. Appreciate your time today. And I look forward to sharing a little bit about Cidian's work with the City of Helena's Transportation Systems Department to help them better understand the roadway network and overall ADA compliance in the city. So I act as sort of a project and account manager for Cidian and then the City of Helena on this initiative. But first want to give you a little bit of insight into Cidian and kind of who we are as a consultant agency. Then I'll chat about our process with Helena. So how we started with a LiDAR data extraction of the roadway network all the way back in September now to where we are now. We're almost at our go live date for the ADAPT software system, which is actually next week to help the city maintain and keep track of this extremely important inventory of data. So Cidian, we're the first software as a service organization to combine the expertise of licensed professional engineers in transportation, professional researchers and software developers to create solutions that make transportation systems safer, more efficient, and more accessible. And we have 2 software systems in our suite of products that we offer to government entities. ADAPT is our solution for that ADA compliance in the right-of-way and asset management that we are deploying in Helena. Crash is our other sort of system for traffic safety and reducing fatalities. But Cidian's approach with the City of Helena really is 2-pronged. So before we could create and deploy the ADAPT system for understanding ADA compliance and where the city is and how many assets are non-compliant or compliant, we really needed to get a full and robust inventory of all of these assets in Helena so we could really be sure that the ADAPT system would be relying on accurate data. And then in the future, when you guys invest in projects and programs, and you would have good faith that it would be investing in the right projects and programs in the right areas in the city. So in order to do so, we did terrestrial LiDAR scanning of 260 miles of roadway in Helena. And this scanning happened over 2 weeks in October. And I'm going to start sharing my screen and show you a little bit of what that LiDAR looks like. It looks like I can't actually share my screen though. It's been disabled. Can someone allow me to share my screen?
Kara, give me just a moment and I'll allow you to.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me take a look here. There we go. So you all should be able to see my screen now. And what you guys are looking at right now is a LiDAR point cloud. And this is a street in Helena. So this is part of Helena's LiDAR. Now, I'm sure that there's varying degrees of familiarity in regards to LiDAR on this call. But before jumping into the ADAPT system, I did want to kind of show you what the output of what one of these scans looks like. So again, we did scan all 260 centerline miles of the City of Helena. And essentially what we do here is we put LiDAR scanners on top of a vehicle. So our project partner, Tectonic, was tasked with doing this. Essentially, they're just driving along the streets of Helena. They're scanning those streets, and then they're building this LiDAR point cloud, which you're seeing right now on your screen. So there's billions, millions of these tiny little dots. And essentially what we're going to do now, or what we did, was start to understand here the measurements of these different assets. So first we start to find those assets like a sidewalk here or a curb ramp. Then we start to understand their attributes, really measure those, their slope, their width, their height. And then from there, we're actually able to determine the ADA compliance or non-compliance of each asset in order for folks at the City of Helena to actually plan and progress from there. So the data that we're extracting from these LiDAR scans is extremely precise. It's down to the millimeter. So we're actually able to really ensure that the compliance understanding and the attribute measurements are very precise as well. And then using our ADAPT system, we're able to automatically stitch each of these millions of dots together, layer in photogrammetry, and extract various assets throughout this network, including those sidewalks, those curb ramps, those crosswalks, APS signals and push buttons, and more. But beyond just identifying where these assets are located in kind of a GIS fashion using our extraction, we're able to get really granular with those measurements. We can extract for each one of those attributes. So from those cross slopes to vertical displacements, running slopes, and more. So using LiDAR to build out these inventories like we did in Helena is much leaner than the traditional boots on the ground approach that a lot of other cities and jurisdictions do. So in the end, at the end of the goal and at the end of the run, it'll really end up saving you more time and money, and ultimately delivering a more accurate and robust inventory that you then can rely on from years on down the line when you look to invest more money in bringing different areas of the city up to compliance with ADA. So with that sort of framework in mind, I now want to take you into a demo environment of the ADAPT tool, which we plan to have our go live date with next week for the City of Helena. I'll be showing you DC's environment since we're still working on finalizing some aspects of Helena's ADAPT tool. But I want to show you a few different components and kind of show you what that LiDAR extraction now is projected and looks like. So you'll see here all these points and dots, all of those asset. Now, one thing that you'll notice about the system is that we're not just containing, merely one type of asset, like just those curb ramps or just those sidewalks. We're really taking every single asset in the entire transportation network because we really want to assess that full door-to-door accessibility experience. So over on the left-hand side here, you'll be able to see the bus stops, the crosswalks, curb ramps, ped signals, and more. We're able to capture all of those. And then within the data toggles, we can, interact and click on or off any one of these assets if we want to say just focus on the bus stops one day or the curb ramps another day, so on and so forth. And then we can actually, zoom in here and we can get a better sense of all these different assets that are within the right-of-way. So this is going to look really similar to Helena's environment, which they'll be able to see next week. But every single asset in this holistic network, they will all have its own ADA considerations, and we're able to capture this using federal requirements like PROAG and ADAG, but also Helena's local accessibility requirements. And we really built ADAPT to meet the needs of ADA in its entirety and allow Helena users to focus on different types of assets within this overall transportation network. So I can click on any one of these assets. Looks like I've selected here a curb ramp, and I'm immediately met with a photo by a field inspector. I can also see, whether or not it's ADA compliant, as well as its ADA priority. I can also see the asset properties. So I can actually see which properties, which are highlighted in red, such as this gutter slope or the landing turning space, which properties are non-compliant, either with ADAG, PROAG, or Helena's local standards. So we're able to get an understanding of that. Further, every single one of these assets have their own individual profile pages, which you can click on here and expand to learn a little bit more about it. And you can share this unique URL with other folks at the City of Helena, or you can also share using our share arrows. But in terms of what's actually included on these pages, so we're immediately met with those ADA actions. So actionable actions which the City of Helena users can take to say, bring this particular curb ramp up to compliance. So it looks like they need to resize the bottom landing and the turning space. It's also assigned an ADA priority. And we can quickly see that cost to bring this curb ramp up to compliance. Now, all the costs and the numbers that you see right now on my screen, these are particular to Washington, D.C. This is the environment that we're in. But for the city of Helena, we're going to be taking your particular numbers and costs and bringing them into the environment. Did I hear a question there? Or was
No,
that
you
just...
did.
Perfect. And then we can see some other asset information. We can also use these profiles as kind of a photo or a document management center. So Helena users are actually able to build out construction plans within the Adapt tool. Then they can actually take them outside of the tool, and you can always tag them to specific profiles as well. In terms of other ways of viewing this asset data, though, so there's a few different lenses that we can look at this data. Now, we know that most folks or jurisdictions that we're speaking with at kind of the beginning of our relationship with them, they're used to this two-color map of green is good and red is bad way of looking at their assets or at compliance and non-compliance in their network. But this really just leaves people wondering, where do we start? And this isn't helpful, but it makes sense when we're talking about taking the legacy infrastructure and bringing it up to modern compliance. Most of the infrastructure in any jurisdiction will be non-compliant. So unlike other systems, Adapt is providing a more detailed and action-oriented compliance evaluation of every single asset, as well as the system as a whole. And this will really provide you a more clear roadmap to help guide the transition process. So we're implementing a priority scale. This is based on degree of compliance and degree of liability risk. And this is determined using TRB presented and a peer-reviewed method that's considering public complaints, physical conditions, land use and demographics, and federal and local accessibility requirements, including PROAG and ADAG. So we're able to customize this to each jurisdiction, which we customize for Helena. And this can really help each jurisdiction, balance priorities that could look like equity goals within budget constraints, limiting liability while also maximizing your return on investment. So there's lots of different sorts of filters and lenses in which you can actually look at this asset data, which is really helpful. Now, I know I don't have too much time left, but I did want to pivot and take you guys to some of the dashboards, which are really powerful, as well as show you what one of the construction plans looks like, which you can actually generate here in the system. So one of the dashboards here that the City of Helena folks that we're working with find really impactful is the sidewalk gap dashboard. So essentially, this dashboard will analyze those gaps in sidewalks, as well as proposed and past sidewalk construction. So you all can start tracking your progress on completing your entire pedestrian network to meet those sustainability and public health and multimodal accessibility goals. So right now you can see that total gap distance, which is 465 miles, compared to the total sidewalk distance, which is almost 1,800 miles. And you're able to get a better understanding of where those gaps exist compared to, where the total sidewalks exist here in this mini map in the network. And as we scroll down here, we have some really great pivot charts that we're able to customize. We can start to drill down on fields such as priority or the year's construction and future construction plans. And we can start to utilize this chart to compare past projects with other future plans. Now, if you ever want to share, any of these dashboards or charts and tables to the public, you can easily flip a switch in your customizations page to show the public. So these dashboards that we build out for folks can really easily be used and maintained kind of as a transparency way of communicating with the public. There's also the compliance overview dashboard. This is another great way to start visualizing the level of compliant assets versus non-compliant assets within the overall pedestrian network. And then lastly, I did want to touch on construction plans. So whenever you have either one asset or a selection of assets, folks are always able to create a construction plan from these. And these plans can also actually be exported outside of the Adapt system. So if you want to, say, go out to bid for a contractor or a consultant on a specific project, like a safe routes to school study and all of the, say, assets around a specific school in Helena, you can really easily do this. And you can just export here. But each of these construction plans, like this example plan for this high school here in Washington, D.C., it'll always list out every single asset contained on this plan. as well as the cost to repair each of these assets. And this cost roll-up will be really, really important and really helpful when you're actually going to, understand and try to see how much money it's going to take to bring specific areas of Helena up to compliance or the entirety of Helena as a whole. And all of this will always be customized, and it will always be summarized here in these construction plans. So I wanted to give you all a little bit of a taste of what we're doing with David and Chris and the rest of the transportation and engineering teams. We're really excited to fly out and meet some of you all next week, and happy to answer any questions now if any of the commission has any.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. That is fascinating. I cannot wait to see it. Just a quick question, which I possibly think you answered, but I'm not sure. With regard to the compliant, non-compliant overlay, the red, green, does not exist in equal non-compliant. So if we're looking at Helena, where we have lots of areas with no sidewalks, I know the sidewalk gap will show that, but does the compliance map, what does it do when there is no sidewalk?
Yeah, so when there is no sidewalk and there should be a sidewalk, as in it might be like a walk shed that we've identified. Basically, a walk shed is between point A and point B, and there should be a sidewalk there because in order to build out that pedestrian network in whole, you need to have it all connected. So we would list that actually as a sidewalk gap. And that would be an area that's suggested for you all to invest in quickly in order to put a sidewalk there. But I know in Helena that there's a lot of trails and maybe dirt roads where you guys don't plan to, necessarily pour concrete in them and make them actual sidewalks. Those would be listed then as kind of NA or not applicable. But those red areas are either sidewalks that are non-compliant, so they exist and they are considered sidewalks and they have cracks in them, or maybe there's something like a post box or something, in the sidewalk that's blocking folks' way from walking on them. So those sidewalks would be deemed as red. But again, sorry, this is kind of a wraparound answer. But if a sidewalk doesn't have to exist, it probably would not be located on that map.
Thank you.
Does that help answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
This one is for Director Knoppe. Can you maybe talk about how you all are envisioning using this tool? I know like the impetus was our sidewalk summits and getting to a point where we have like a comprehensive policy about how we're going to address the sidewalk issues. But we also have a lot of areas in town that need like significant infrastructure upgrades. We also have been talking a lot about, when there's new development, folks, when we give a variance, they're waiving the right to protest a future SID. Are you envisioning this as being part of that kind of planning process?
So yeah, Mayor and Commission, once we get the data and see what the data is going to tell us, there's a number of things that have already come to our mind that have come before you recently, like sidewalks on the south side where we have a steep topography on one side going up and steeper topography on the other side of the street going down. So, we're hopeful that we can use some of this data to extract potential heat maps so we can maybe come up with a policy for these areas that have these situations. And then it's a policy, and then we don't have to bring every household back to the commission. There's already a policy established, and this is how we follow it. And this is where we put maybe curbside sidewalks or some kind of hybrid curbside boulevard sidewalk. So I think there's a number of possibilities. Along with our asset management, it collected all the signs in Helena. The one thing that, what they're seeing, which they see in a lot of cities that they work with, is the mailboxes are in the path of travel for the ADA. And so those are things that we can address through programs and reach out to the community to inform them and educate them about some of the things that we're seeing. So it'll take a little bit of time to digest all the data that we're seeing.
Your commissioners, David and Ryan might roll their eyes when I say this. This is the baseline where we take an inventory of what we own, what condition it's in, and then that information allows us to make all, or we would make policy level decisions based upon CCIPs. So voters we're operating now with full inventory and conditional understanding. And
one more question, Mr. Mayor. So when we talk about, and I know this is gonna come up, you know, at our next sidewalk summit, I'm sure. Not only with the funding mechanism, but when we're talking about how we start prioritizing, are we, like with this tool, are we gonna be able to say, this is our safe routes to school plan for each school, this is the cost, and then can we like make that available to the public?
So Mayor and Commissioners, yes, I mean, just like the construction plan that Kara showed you, we can look at those particular areas and see what, you know, what a block looks like around the schools or 2 blocks and come up with, you know, projected pricing on that and, you know, present that if that's the way forward that we want to work. We're planning to work with Cidian to give a public facing site so that the public can see some of this information. I mean, I think a lot of it would be boring to a lot of people and maybe overwhelming, but to us engineers, you know, this is what we live by, is by our data. So I think it's going to be great. And like they said, they'll be in Helena next week to give the training to us to get us up and rolling on this. We're excited to get to using the program to see what we have and where we go to the next steps.
Thank you.
So,
Go ahead.
so Mayor and Commissioner, and I think this program for us goes even beyond just our ADA impacts in general. That was obviously the sort of the initiating factor as to why we sought this program out. But as we tend to do, we've pushed the software company to really expand on what we can do with their software. And so, for example, when we come to our mill and overlay programs for streets, if we're going to do that process in an area, all of those ramps have to be in compliance. We have to bring them all into compliance in order to do that mill and overlay. So as we're planning out for our CIP in the future, we're trying to identify those areas that we can go to do mill and overlays and things like that. Currently, we have to go out and manually measure all of the ramps in the area that we're looking to do. So with this tool, we'll be able just to do that from the desk and put together a plan that much easier and have it continuous, and it'll have the cost in there that we can roll into that capital plan.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see this comment and a question. I can see this being this particular program and the information it provides paired with a traffic study to help us prioritize where sidewalks and where improvements and investment could go. I saw on your dashboard that it was a gap. It said gaps. And then to bring that down, let's say we do install some sidewalks. Is that information given to you by our Department of Transportation? Is that how that number is updated on your dashboard?
Mm-hmm. So that number can actually be updated actually right when the work order comes in. So we plan on building out, well, we're in the beginning stages of building out a work order system that's going to connect with the My Helena app. So our thought is the Helena and Cidian team is that all work orders throughout the entire life cycle, so from the generation to the in progress to the completion, that's automatically going to update in the back end of the Adapt tool. So our thought is that the sidewalk apps dashboard will automatically update after new construction begins and after a sidewalk has either been installed or repaired. So that can be immediately entered and it should immediately reflect in the sidewalk apps dashboard.
I'm really, so this is just the coolest. Are we going to be able to use this for this year's budget cycle?
Mayor Commissioners, yes. I mean, as of next week, we're going to be going live. After our training, there's some work that we still have to do to input our current CIP into their system. But like Kara said, that we can develop our CIPs at least for sidewalks and the infrastructure that's being managed by this asset manager within this tool, and be able to project and look at things as they get, improved, and things that come up. So thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does this tool have a public facing side?
Mayor, Commissioners, yes, there'll be a public facing dashboard for the public. And
Thanks.
Any other comments from the commission? Do you have any public comments?
Mr. Mayor, I have no public comment online.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate your presentation.
Thank you all so much. Look forward to meeting you next week.
This time, is there anyone from the public wishes to address the commission? Madam Clerk.
Mayor, I have no public comment.
Meeting is adjourned.